My name is Steve Babitsky, and we're here today at the SEAK National Workers' Comp and Occupational Medicine Conference with Mr. Barry Nixon, a workplace violence expert and executive director of the National Institute for the Prevention of Workplace Violence. Mr. Nixon, welcome. Let's start out with how big of a problem nationally is workplace violence?
Well, workplace violence is much bigger than the general public recognizes. And to give you a context, so far in the 21st century, more than 10,000 people have actually been murdered or committed suicide in the workplace. But obviously, a lot of that doesn't make the news, and you don't see it every day, but it's an ongoing and much more pervasive problem than people recognize.
So what are some of the elements of an effective prevention strategy? Well,
the key is really to understand that prevention outweighs reaction, and that getting ahead of the curve and identifying issues early and intervening is the way to really prevent incidents of workplace violence. And I'll add that the vast majority of incidents of workplace violence that we encounter actually were preventable if the right steps had been taken in advance. So the key issue, to answer your question, is really early intervention, early identification of problems, and addressing them before it actually escalates into an issue.
So with that in mind, what are some of the early warning signs of potential violence that employers need to be aware of?
Well, there are a number of them. One is obviously an individual that overtly is making threats. That's pretty obvious. But someone that is unreasonable in their behavior, and by unreasonable, no matter what decisions are made, what policies are implemented, to that person it's unreasonable. People who are in deep depression. So again, not just normal depression, that's not a problem, but a person who is in deep depression is not necessarily thinking as clearly. Someone who is intoxicated or has a heavy user of drugs and alcohol because it impairs thinking. One that I always point out is a person that owns a firearm and is a zealot in terms of its ability to harm people. So again, the issue is not that they own a firearm, because a lot of legitimate citizens own firearms, but they're constantly talking about the ability of a firearm to hurt people. Then that's certainly something to pay attention to. People who are paranoid and always think that someone's out to get them, as well as people that hold grudges. Again, for the slightest little thing, they want to hold a grudge against someone. And the key point I'll make, and there are really 13 of these, but I won't go through all of them, is it's where a combination of these things come together, and then that suggests to us we ought to intervene in some way.
So let's say an employer knows that an employee is having a serious marital problem. How can the employer prevent the spouse from engaging in a workplace violence incident?
Well, the first part of it is they have to know about it. And that may seem like an obvious answer, but oftentimes the person doesn't bring it up because they're embarrassed or for whatever reason they don't want to. So making sure that employees understand that the employer welcomes knowing that they're not going to be punitive towards the person if they make that information known to them. And then once the employer knows, there are a number of things they can do. Obviously, they can notify security, employees in the department not to let the person into the facility. At a more severe level, they can obviously hire a security firm to follow the person. But the key issue is knowledge of the issue and then taking appropriate actions to prevent it from escalating into a situation.
Last question. What are some of the employer's best practices for workplace violence prevention?
Well, it's interesting you asked that question. What I'm going to talk about here at the SEAK conference is what I call the next generation of prevention. And it really hinges on what is called prevention by design. So it's no longer where we kind of add on, talk about the early warning signs, make sure you have a threat management team. Those are important things, but it's building the whole concept of prevention into the way that we run our organizations. Building a security conscious, safety conscious culture is the real answer for how you prevent workplace violence.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.